Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Schenker, editor-in-chief of the Innovator, English language publication owned by Les Echos. Very happy to be here this afternoon with Nicolas Dufourcq, the head of Bpifrance, and Charles Egly from the CEO and co-founder of Younited Credit. So the topic today is France is back. So the French fintech sector has over 350 startups. The French government has created a $10 billion fintech fund to help fuel growth in the sector. What, Nicolas, in your mind, are France's fintech strengths today?
The basic strength, I would say, is that all this is embedded in a huge ecosystem of technology now, in which you have a lot of brains first, notably in machine learning, data science, and so forth. But not only, I mean, every year, the whole French ecosystem is injecting capital and equity in now 800 startups per year. So you can imagine the nature of the context in which the fintech startups are evolving. We have raised 3.5 billion euros this year, so there is a lot of capital. There is a lot of human capital, also a lot of brains, a lot of science, and an old tradition of finance. Finance has always been a very significant industry in France. So there are all reasons to think that fintech unicorns will come from France also.
Charles, you're kind of halfway there to being a unicorn, and in many ways you could be considered a kind of poster boy for the France fintech sector. You have some big clients in France, like Free, pan-European clients like N26, and about 40% of your business is done outside of France. So give us some numbers. Tell us, where you are today.
Okay, in a few words, so we created the company 7 years ago. We've just reached the 1 billion euro of consumer loans granted since inception, so it's a good milestone. We have 300 people working in our offices in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. We invest a lot in tech, data, and products. Of course, we benefit from one of the good subsidies of the French government, which we call the Crédit Impôt Recherche, which helps us to invest in deep tech. So we've launched 3 countries outside of France, so Italy, Spain, and Portugal, and we are about to launch Germany, Romania, and Sweden.
So all of that sounds great, but why don't we have more fintech unicorns in France as yet? Nicolas, do you want to take this?
It's going to come. It takes a little bit of time. So you will have French fintechs in notably the field of neobanks. I would say that Younited is a strong candidate, but you have others. You have Alan in the insurance sector. You have October also, which is another beautiful platform in France. In the field of blockchain, you have Ledger, which is also an extraordinary company, which is rising extremely fast. And you have some others. You have also a lot of French software financial companies, which are really powerful and promising. One of them, by the way, is called Kiriba, and Kiriba is already a unicorn. Kiriba has gotten an offer for $1.2 billion. And Kiriba is a software dedicated to cash management, which is known to most of the French significant banks. So just take a little bit of time, but it's coming. If you put your ear on the railway, you listen to unicorns coming.
So Charles, you've managed to scale, even though this is still an issue for not just French companies, but all European companies. If you could change anything about the situation in France, to make things easier to scale, what would you change?
I mean, to us, scaling up is just a function of the equity you can raise. Of course, having more capital can accelerate the scaling, but at this stage, we have enough capital to scale. I would say now, next step for France is to be able to raise more than 100 million euro of equity per round. Once fintechs can reach this level, this stage, then of course the scaling is more quicker and stronger, I would say. But at this stage, I mean, the equity scene in France, it's quite strong, so we don't have any issue to scale.
You have more and more rounds which are, I would say, above 70 million euros, 75, 80, 85, 100 million euros, and so forth. So this also is coming. I mean, you have now a family of growth funds in France, and not only ours. We have 1 billion growth funds, which is quite effective. And by the way, we are shareholders of Younited. But you have other ones who now will be more and more in a position through syndicated rounds to put 100 million euros in new operations.
So up until now, I think it's fair to say that the fintech sector in France and pretty much everywhere else in Europe has been in competition with the UK, which has been seen as the home of the fintech sector in Europe. Will Brexit change that? Will this work to France's advantage?
I think there is a psychological effect, undoubtedly, notably for part of the French youth and the French brains that went to London to work in those fintechs and who possibly would contemplate coming back. Because at the end of the day, you choose a sort of professional quality of life. So the fintech scene in France, in Paris notably, but not only in Paris, by the way, is already buoyant and is going to be more and more attractive. So I would suppose that you'll have some comebacks of people. Now, when you cruise the US to meet the LPs or the venture capital funds, not only in California, but also on the East Coast, you ask them, what do you think of the fintech scene in France? And they immediately can cite some names, his name, for example, but not only. And so you see attraction, attention from these people on the scene, which is now being revealed. So all this will have consequences.
Will Brexit give you any advantage?
I mean, before that, all fintechs, all investors wanted to invest in fintech with a huge basis in the UK. Now it's no longer the case with the Brexit, so it makes other fintechs, other European fintechs more appealing. And on top of that, I mean, I think the French fintech ecosystem will grow since, I mean, people from UK will move to France and other capitals in Europe. So, yeah, I think it's an opportunity.
There was an EY study, by the way, which is good to be cited. I mean, they're saying that Paris was one of the best places to be for fintechs today. Huh?
Okay.
It's not a French company. It's EY.
Okay. So let's turn to another area where perhaps France has an advantage, and that is the way that ICOs, Bitcoin, etc., are regulated. In what way do you see that as being a potential advantage?
It is. I mean, now, as of last November, the new regulation in France has been declared and implemented. So it's extremely easy now to launch ICOs. It doesn't mean that the ICO market today is buoyant. Huh? That's another question. But it shows, at least, that coming from the French regulator, I mean, the governor was there just before, there is quite a big openness on ICOs and blockchain. We really want to be a place to be as far as blockchain is concerned.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier, Nicolas, that there's a lot of established traditional financial services players here in France. What about opportunities of collaboration between fintechs and the traditional players to help grow the entire ecosystem? We do have a recent, not so positive example of BCPE and Fidor Bank, but can you point to some successful collaborations that give room for optimism?
So it's all about the question of make or buy for the incumbents, because they have to digitalize. What I say to my troops is that Bpifrance typically has to become a fintech with a physical network, and not the reverse. Which means that we are working with a lot of startups, and most often we choose buy, preferably to make. We tend to think that even with the best talents in our IT direction, we will not be capable to be at par with the quality of the code and the intelligence coming from the startup scene on all the verticals of performance of a bank. So typically for our commercialization of our loans to very small SMEs, we're talking of loans of 10,000 euros, 15,000 euros, we have decided to take Younited. We could have decided to, program our own platform. We decided not to do it and to take a platform, which is one of the reasons why we are also shareholders of that company. A lot of French banks have embarked in that kind of way of thinking. I can cite names, of course, but they are well known. What is quite important is, and in that way I will probably reassure my neighbor, if you want to take control of the startup, when you're a big company, the risks of you killing the startups are quite high. So you have to accept to remain minority shareholder. You have to accept to build an ecosystem of startups around you, and to live with it. Otherwise, you are poised to probably fail.
Do you want to add to that, Charles?
So sorry.
Do you want to add to that in terms of collaboration with big players?
I think we have a good example with some of our shareholders. Of course, with Crédit Mutuel Arkea, which is, a bank, a French bank that invested in our capital at the very beginning, and we have lots of collaborations with them in terms of back office, fund wiring, risks. So it's a good example of operational partnership, and of course with BPI, as Nicolas said.
Okay. All right, so let's look now at what's next for France FinTech. Where do you go from here?
I think you're going to have some success stories, and the brands will be known, will become, I would say, legendary brands, and therefore they will attract new candidates for startup creation, attract a lot of new brains, and so forth. As far as artificial intelligence is concerned, we had a discussion backstage. One of the big problems in France is that the salary for a researcher, at the beginning of a career, is 1,500 euros per month. So it's really a major problem to fight against the brain drain coming from the US companies. So one of the solutions is for the French fintechs, powerful fintechs, because he already has 300 people. It's not a startup, huh? It's already a significant scale-up. In French, we would call that une entreprise de taille intermédiaire. These companies will recruit good AI brains, and this is extremely important. Extremely important. I would tend to think that because of the scarcity of public money today, and for quite a number of years ahead, we need private money to finance AI in Europe, and it will come from these kinds of companies.
Charles, what do you say is going to be next for France FinTech?
So I think a successful fintech must not stop raising equity in order to continue to grow, to fuel the growth, to be able to recruit top profile, data analysts, tech guys. So it's really important to continue to grow and to raise money. Also, I think the French fintech sector would need a flagship IPO, because it's a kind of a label to show that the ecosystem can grow and can be successful. So,
are you going to be it?
We are, of course, a candidate. In the midterm, it will make lots of sense for Younited, because we think we have the perfect model for this: high growth, high profitability potential. So I think we could be a good candidate. Of course, we need to study this, but
I could add one point,
sure,
which is that today in Paris there is approximately 10 billion euros of what we call dry powder to be invested in the French innovation scene. So we have basically the capital and the equity to be invested in the next 30 months, considering the needs. Going forward, when I say that we are investing every year in 800 startups, all these startups, not all, some will die, of course, but the significant proportion is not dying at all. There are very good quality of entrepreneurs. They will have to raise a lot of capital. So what we know is that in 3 years from now, we're going to have to attract more foreign capital to France. Because the capital that we have today is mostly French capital, plus the European Investment Fund, plus a little bit of outside capital, but not so much. So one of the battles that all of us have to fight is to convince the US LPs, and by the way, the Chinese LPs, to invest in the French funds, which will feed the growth of the fintech ecosystem in France. Today, we don't have enough of US money. We have US funds, but we don't have US LPs. And we don't have enough of Chinese LPs also. So that's the battle ahead.
So then to kind of end, wrap up our discussion, the future of France FinTech will be IPOs and hopefully an injection of capital from LPs, from China and the US. You heard it here. Thank you very much. Please give a nice round of applause for our panel.